What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Prairie Puck Podcast. I believe this is episode 15 or 14. I think it's 14, actually. But either way, welcome back to another episode. And today we're going to be talking about the Pacific Division, and we're joined with a very special guest from TwistedWristerHockey. What's up, Nick? Welcome to the show. How's your day going so far?
It's terrific, and thank you so much for having me on the show here, and excited to chat Pacific Division and just the Western Conference as a whole. I mean, we're just a couple days from the season starting. I can't believe it.
Same. It's going to be so good. It's about time. Full season hockey. I can't wait. It's also going to be great for us Canadians to watch our normal teams play against American teams, I feel like.
Yes.
Like, I'm so tired of watching the Calgary Flames, the Edmonton Oilers. I'm sick of it. I got to see some new teams.
Yeah.
So it'll be nice
No one should ever have to play a team 10 times in a season.
Especially when it's the Ottawa Senators. God damn.
Oh, God. I can confirm, Jake, this is episode 15.
15. All right, cool.
Yes.
I always seem to forget. I couldn't remember because we skipped that podcast one.
Yes,
on Spotify.
because it was just us. That's because it was just us talking at 2 in the morning.
So the Pacific Division is going to be an interesting division this year, and not because it's full of a lot of talented teams, but because the newest team to the NHL is there in the Seattle Kraken. Nick, what are your thoughts on the Kraken roster? Personally, I'm very impressed with the way they drafted and how they drafting it, because it's different from how a lot of us thought it might look. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, if you compare their roster to what the Golden Knights put together in their first offseason before they took the ice, I got to say the Kraken have them beat. They have the best goaltending in the division. They have large, capable, reliable defensemen for the most part. And the forward group, there's no one there who's going to dazzle you, but they have some guys who broke out last year, somebody like a Mason Appleton and Jared McCann. They do have to account for the Gord injury, but nonetheless, this roster overall, I think in the division especially, can be a pretty darn competitive team.
I really think so too. I really don't know who could stand in the way of taking, when it comes to Seattle. I think that even though it is a weaker division, I think that they have a pretty easy path to that number one spot in that division. Is there any teams that you think could really surprise in the Pacific this year when it comes to just their roster right now and the maybe undervalued players that they currently have?
Well, I don't know if the players themselves are undervalued when you look at who they acquired in the offseason, but I think some people might be sleeping on the Kings this year. They brought in Danault, they brought in Arvidsson. They even have some secondary guys, and players who pair with, Ajay Kopitar out there, guys like Iafallo and Adrian Kempe. I think that those guys fall under the radar a little bit as well. So, I mean, just when you look at personally, I think Vegas locks that first position, and a lot of people would think that Edmonton would lock into the second position. But between spots, I would say 3 and 6, I think it can go a variety of ways, or even 2 through 6.
Vegas is an interesting team this year because I personally don't really. I know the offense is there, and they haven't lost that many big name guys, but Robin Lehner is an interesting name as goaltender, and I trust him as a goalie, but I feel like this is going to be the first year where we maybe see a step back taken by the Golden Knights. I don't know why. I just have this gut feeling I can't shake. I think the trading Marc-Andre Fleury and how that went down, I think that really shook the entire fan organization side of it, and just the entire player side of the organization. I think it really shook that team to its core a little bit, trading your Vezina-winning goaltender, the heart and soul of that franchise, for basically a bag of pucks. That can really damage the morality of a team, especially when you're trying to win a Stanley Cup. And we've already seen how fast they're willing to turn over anybody like, a Paul Stastny, a guy who comes in, picks them over the team that beat. It's just, they're very interesting with how they've always handled their situations with cap and players. So I don't know. I just have this weird feeling that Vegas, we're going to see a step back this year. Even though they still got a lot of good forward talent, there's just something in the back of my head that just can't give them that lock for that number one spot this year. I don't know why. Usually
Well, they're really taking a chance this year because last year it was like Vegas played it pretty safe last year if we think about it. They were always upgrading their players, and it's safe short-term wise because you're getting rid of guys that are not going to crack the roster just yet. So you can confidently make that return if you're saying this is the year that we want to win. You're going to run a 2-goalie tandem, which they did, which arguably is one of the better 2-goalie tandems you're going to have. You have a solid goaltender in Marc-Andre Fleury who plays a very outward style. He's not the most relaxed goalie to watch in the net, but he's always very lively. He's always very interactive in there. And then you have a guy like Robin Lehner who's a lot more, I don't want to say laid back in the net, but he's calming. If Robin Lehner's getting scored on, it's not from a scramble play. It's from a very good shot. or if he's making saves, there are not going to be 5 rebounds where he's going to show up on the highlight reel later because he's making this desperation save. If he stops the puck, it's getting covered, which is very important. And now you're pretty much taking one half of that tandem away and saying, okay, can we run this style the entire year, pretty much? Which is interesting to think, honestly.
And as Jets fans, we can look into their backup goalie situation now and see Laurent Brossoit. And even though I love Laurent Brossoit, and I really do wish that he was kept as the Winnipeg Jets backup for this year, he has been a little bit on the decline. When you look at the games played, the quality of the games played, going through the last 3 years he spent with the Winnipeg Jets. In his first year in Winnipeg, he played 21 games, and he was stellar. He went 6-2. Actually, excuse me, the record, he was 13-6. He had a really good save percentage, a .925 save percentage. He was very, very good. The year after that, it goes down from his .925 to an .895. And then last year went back up to a .918, but still, nonetheless, he played the least amount of goals last year, games played last year as well. Yeah. So what's the workload going to be like in a situation where Robin Lehner has had one of the best tandems in the NHL, now having to come in and have to play a lot more games in front of a team that has really relied on using both goaltenders and using their strengths, like you said, Zach. So I really don't know what to expect.
He's a matchup goalie.
He really is. He really is. But the problem is that how are you going to use him to match up against teams when in the past you haven't had that ability to match up because you've literally just had 2 great goaltenders you can roll out at any time. And like it proves because he won the Vezina last year, which is crazy to think about. Dumping a Vezina winning goaltender, even at that age, it's surprising. So I like Laurent Brossoit, but Vegas is interesting. Exactly. It really is surprising. So Laurent Brossoit is going to be interesting in net this year. I think he can be good for them, but they have to find that right balance of the teams that make the most sense for him in a matchup and also making sure that they don't burn out Robin Lehner. Because if you burn out Robin Lehner, I really don't think Laurent Brossoit can carry you to a Pacific Division title. No.
Yeah. I'm interested in Seattle's goaltending duo with
me too.
Grubauer and Drieger, because when I saw the draft and I saw them draft Drieger, it was kind of the assumption that he was going to be their starter and that we're going to really, give him the reins and see if he can make it work. But now that Grubauer's there, this is a terrifying goaltending duo. So
it really is.
One of the best in the league. So I'm curious to see, because especially with how much big defensemen that they drafted, I'm curious to see more so the style that they decide to play, whether they decide to play this really defensive hockey similar that we see in the New York Islanders, just because I think that would be a system in which the team that they've built would succeed. And almost similar to Montreal, where you don't have any real star forwards, but you have a lot of really good depth forwards that are quick, and you could just grind and wear down teams, similar to the way that Montreal was.
For sure.
And how they would just beat teams with speed, and, they'd shoot 1 billion shots and one of them would go in, so.
And on the back end, they had some big bodies there, too, with, Weber and Sherratt and whatnot, too. Yeah.
Then you get Alexiak coming in if you're this Kraken. That's a really good big guy to have to make that blue line a lot more intimidating.
For sure.
Larson is a very good defenseman to grab. He's had a really good season last year.
Carson Steucey is a very underrated defenseman, I would say, too. If he's on your third pair, you're sitting pretty. Yeah.
And hasn't Connor Geekie looked pretty good in the preseason as well for Seattle?
He's had a couple of very solid games. Yeah, he's a Ron Francis draft pick, so that's also kind of an interesting storyline to follow for both him and for Hayden Fleury. They were obviously on team. They were on such a stacked team with Carolina. They didn't get quite the opportunity, but Geekie's almost locked into third line center at this point. And he's had the potential. He just needed some opportunity there, and with Yanni Gourde going down, that kind of opens the door for him.
For sure. Yeah. Another guy I think could really have a good season finding his home finally on Seattle is Ryan Donato. He's bounced around a lot the last couple of seasons, and he's been I'm not going to say pretty solid. He's been damn good for the Seattle Kraken in this preseason, and I think he's going to be a really underrated get for them, like a last-minute addition to that team, and I think he's going to finally find a home in the NHL with the Seattle Kraken, and I hope so, because he's got a lot of talent. I want to see that kid do well.
He can get off to a good start. The thing is, can he consistently put that together for an 82-game season? So
San Jose took him, right? That was because we had him on San Jose, and then I thought that they were just going to draft Donato just straight out of San Jose. But no, they waited for free agency. How was he on San Jose, honestly?
Yeah, it was something that instantly looked like a win for them because his contract was still pretty team friendly, and he was getting some goals, and he was generating some chances too early on, but he was in the top 6, and eventually they dropped him down the lineup, and it just wasn't quite there for him. So he needs to have some other players kind of supporting him, and I mean in terms of like generating those opportunities. So yeah, Seattle, I mean, for just league minimum to bring him on board, I think that was a decent deal. They did something like that with Riley Sheahan as well, who is probably going to make at least the 4th line center for that team too.
Yeah, another good example of that. And I feel like Seattle, like we talked about earlier, because they don't have a lot of big name guys, like obviously probably their biggest name forward being Jordan Eberle and Schwartz, and then maybe Alexander Wenberg. You know, you can argue these guys are big name marquee guys. I really like how they assembled this roster because they have, I feel like, more guys making less than $1 million that are going to be playing for their team this season that are actually going to be consistent NHLers than anyone else in the NHL trying to compete for a actual playoff spot right now. And that's how you build a good winning contending team. Good team-friendly contracts. They don't put them into a hold. They still have $8 million to play with in case they need to add somebody at the deadline, which is a huge thing to have. As Jets fans, we know how scary it can be now to have no cap space, and I don't like it. So $8 million is very nice. That's a lot of flexibility in case something starts to go wrong. And I think I got to give credit to Ron Francis. I really think that he's done a really good job with this. I don't think that, as a fan and someone who loves the game of hockey, I don't think that I would have done anything different. I would have drafted almost the same type of players. I feel like a lot of people would say the same thing, and I think that they're going to be a really interesting team to talk about. Now, I want to talk to you, Nick, about their new rival, just a couple hours north of the border, in this Vancouver Canucks. My second team, because a lot of people are crapping on the Vancouver Canucks this year. They don't see the Canucks being a team that's going to, even make the playoffs potentially. I don't know if I see that. I see the Vancouver Canucks this year as kind of that 50-50 team where either they're going to be dog crap, not make the playoffs at all, or a team that surprises and can somehow fight to really maintain top 3 in the division. And I genuinely mean that. I think that there are a lot of good pieces on the Canucks this year that could have really good seasons, but there's all a bunch of variables at play. There's nothing that, I can draw in the sand and say this is going to be a team that wins. What are your thoughts on the Vancouver Canucks heading into this season?
Yeah, you have to remember that, you throw last season out for them, which, they were hit by COVID as, worse than anybody else out there. I was chatting with Canuck Clay about this, so he raised this point. Yeah. They were a Game 7 away from the conference final in 2020. And, and a lot of that core talent is still there. And then they bring in Garland and Ekman-Larsson, who, not the biggest fan of him, but nonetheless, that adds another dynamic layer to the defense. So I think this team could be pretty good as well. In terms of like my predictions, I'm not banking on them per se, but if they finish third in that division, I won't be surprised.
Yeah, they have a lot of good talent on that team, and now that you get Pettersson signed, you get Hughes signed to those good deals. Yeah. I think that the morale on that team's going to change, and I think also not gonna lie, as like you said, I'm not the biggest fan of Ekman-Larsson. I never have been, especially the last few seasons. I really haven't liked his play. But I think he's already looked pretty bad, much kind of on that right path already through preseason. He's looked a lot more composed, and he's looked a lot more confident, something that you haven't really seen him have in his game the last few seasons in Arizona. So if he can even play with some level of what he used to be at, even at that like $7.26 million cap hit, I think that that'll be a win for the Canucks. The only problem is, will he be able to play that consistently?
Yes, which reminds me of when we had our episode with Urinating Tree, and he was talking about, when you trade for a guy like Ekman-Larsson, you kind of are banking on this idea that he's going to go back to his former self and play that way, because you're getting, what? It's a $7.5 million cap hit, I believe, right?
It is, yeah. No, 7.26, just shy.
7.26, yeah. So it's looked promising in preseason. However, I think we got to give it a few games into the regular season, and hopefully, sure. I would like to see Vancouver do pretty well. So I hope that he can pick up what he's got, because I have an Ekman-Larsson jersey.
Find that those first practice videos. I don't know if you guys all saw it.
I saw that on Twitter.
Those things of all of the players from Arizona in the first practice as Canucks were like throwing up. They were dead. Like Ekman-Larsson was the last guy done on the bag skate. I was just sitting there going, does Arizona do cardio? Like, how does this happen? Like, one guy does it.
Only illegally for prospects.
He had a bad off season. 2 guys do it. We have some problems here. All of the guys that you trade for do it, and you're just like, okay, this is not normal. Like, it's such a weird thing.
Yeah, and then not to mention the fact that I believe Garland just destroyed OEL into the boards and just left him there looking dead. I saw that in the first game. It's just Canucks are always like that though, man. Louis Eriksson's own goal was in his first shift. Like, first game as a Canuck, man.
I'm pretty
like,
sure he scored more goals as a Coyote now than he has his entire tenure.
Oh,
maybe that's
that
why
contract.
Maybe that's why Ekman Larsson hasn't played as well. They haven't done nearly as much training or anything
exactly,
the last few
right?
seasons. They haven't given a shit.
God, the only question mark I have on the Canucks defense this year, and as a team, the one thing I really didn't like them doing, is ironically as a Jet fan, that Tucker Pullman contract. That is going to bite them in the ass hard.
Oh,
it is
yeah.
such a bad contract. As someone who watched Tucker Pullman go from his ups and downs, he's not even worth a minimum, in my opinion. I think he's better suited as an AHL guy. I've seen them all, and I just can't believe they're giving him $2.5 million until 2024, 2025.
So let's also now talk about the other two. So we mentioned LA. We can also circle back to that if we want to kind of talk more about it. But what about the other two teams in California? We have the Anaheim Ducks and the San Jose Sharks.
Exactly.
Yes. I figured you'd have some interesting things to say about both of these because they play quite a lot.
Nick, why don't you just go off a little bit, share your thoughts on the Sharks, share your thoughts on maybe even more of the Ducks, what anything you want to talk about.
All the California teams. Go for it.
We'd love to be educated.
Okay, going straight Cali for this one. Okay, all right, we'll start with the Ducks. So, a lot of people imagine that they're going to be, again, a bottom feeder. I think that's probably still the case here. They're still fairly shallow when it comes to, like consistent producers offensively, but I think that starts to kind of take a turn, especially in the second half this year. Of course, Zegras is going to be up there, and they had a couple of forwards who, in the time that I watched them last year, they had some shining performances. A guy like Max Comtois. They'll need some more out of some of the younger guys like Steele and Terry as well. But you'll have, of course, your franchise cornerstone kind of making his full season debut there. And then you'll have Jamie Drysdale on the backside as well. And then you have sort of the veterans with Manson and Fowler. So it's like, okay, this team, it's not going to be a world beater out there, but they could, frustrate some opponents. Gibson is still in net. Not so sure about backup goaltending for them, but anyway, if they can at least keep the puck out of their own zone a little bit more, then Gibson hopefully doesn't get absolutely shelled out there every night. So I don't know, 8th, 7th most likely for the Ducks, and I would probably say the same for the Sharks too. I think that they seem a little bit different in training camp this year. The past couple of training camps, they've just been flat, to be honest, but they have a little bit more of an exuberance to them, and I think one of the reasons is probably that Evander Kane hasn't been in the locker room. I don't attribute all of that to him, but I think of the fact that they have a couple of younger talents that are actually going to stay on the roster this year, hopefully. So, William Eklund is probably going to make the team. We weren't expecting that, actually, but obviously the prospect of seeing him in the top 6 would be thrilling. Jasper Weatherby is another guy who could possibly crack this lineup. And then on the backside, Mario Ferraro is becoming a great young defenseman, a guy who's not going to score, 60 points in the season by any means, but the guy is 5'11", but he hits anything that moves. He plays above his weight. He led the team in block shots last year. That guy's just got a heart and soul that that they've been missing once Joe Pavelski had left a couple of years ago. He's kind of growing into a role kind of like that, slowly but surely. So I am looking forward to the Sharks, but I'm keeping my expectations pretty darn modest. I'd say at best they could finish maybe 5th in the division.
Yeah, I always say that when a team's in a weird rebuild, if they can give you some entertaining hockey games and not be absolutely terrible, then it's a win season. Obviously you want that. I'll want them in the little back of your mind to be terrible for that draft selection, but nonetheless, I think I really agree with you on what you said there about the Ducks and the Sharks. I think they're not going to be the greatest teams of the Pacific, but I don't think they're going to be god-awful terrible. I think there will be some good individual performances to highlight in the season, and I think that as it goes on, I think there could... Yep. I don't think they'll surprise and, make a wild card push or anything like that, but I think that they'll have some entertaining hockey to play with some of these younger guys. So, yeah, for sure. What are your thoughts on Evander Kane and that whole situation, how it's progressed from the offseason? Because it is like the never-ending story with that guy. Everything from the whole stuff with the wife and the gambling to now he's not even fake COVID card and all the vaccination stuff.
That's bad. Yeah.
Yeah, if you know anything about the Edmonton Elks, you know that shit, it has consequences. They had a player on their team who had he had given fake health documents, and he got kicked off the team in the very next day.
And he's banned from the CFL for life.
Banned from the CFL, got booted straight off the team.
So yeah.
I mean, that might be the saving grace for the front office, to be frank. Honestly. In terms of unloading his contract, and in doing so being able to maybe re-sign Tomas Hertl for the future if he still wants to stay there. Otherwise, the cap hell would be even worse if they were eating Kane's salary. It's something that I can't even keep up with what's going on with Evander Kane every day. It's like he's almost like an A-list celebrity in all the drama that surrounds him. It's unfortunate just because he's been a great goal scorer, and defensively he's been very good as well. He's been used a lot on penalty kills. He's been used on breakaways and odd man rushes. So he's a very talented player, but it's going to be an addition by subtraction ultimately, because you don't want that to distract players in the locker room.
For sure.
Yeah.
I've always just wanted to see him succeed, and I was so happy when he got to San Jose and they signed him after the trade, and I was like, maybe he'll finally find a home. And then he was so good. He had the 30-goal season back in 2018-19, and he's been solid for you guys ever since. And
they made the Western Conference Final.
Yeah, I just wish that he was able to get his life together, because he has the skill. Well, he's got a good situation too, like finally a good fit for him on the Sharks, I feel like, and he's just throwing away his career, and it's just
well, if this newest thing is true about the health documents, that's forgery.
Exactly.
A crime. So that's why Edmonton was as extreme as they were for the CFL.
Yeah, and I'd say that even with Kane's on-ice antics, with like Ryan Reeves in the past, like that stuff, I couldn't care less about that, because the guy produced, and it's entertaining too. So
that was fun to watch. That was fun.
He made you forget that he led the league in penalty minutes for 2 straight years, because you didn't really feel it, because you could feel that when he wasn't taking those penalties, when he was on the ice, he was actually making a positive influence on the team, so it didn't matter.
Rivalries are fun.
He was under control last year too with penalties as well. He was much, much better. Yeah.
Which is why this kind of came out of nowhere, because it actually seemed like he actually had a good year, like a good 1 year, and then we hear this.
Yeah.
So that about leaves, I believe, the only 2 Pacific teams left here are Edmonton and Calgary.
Yep.
The 2 Alberta teams, the most inward teams from the Pacific Coast are left. And so far, you've said that you expect you expect the Sharks and the Ducks to be at the bottom. You expect Seattle to kind of be possible to be able to traverse there. Vegas should be near the top-ish, like the top half. Do you then have, and you had the Vancouver kind of in that range where it could be, so then would they throw the other 2 in there?
Yeah, I'll break that down quickly. So, I mean, I still see Vegas at the top. Second, a lot of people would say Edmonton, and for many reasons I can agree. I think kind of like Edmonton or maybe even Seattle's kind of third. I honestly don't see Seattle with that defense and goaltending. I don't see them finishing any lower than third in that division. Then I say the next teams that are jockeying are between the Canucks, the Kings, and the Flames. I actually could see the Flames taking a bit of a nosedive, to be honest. But and then, of course, you got the 2 bottom feeders. Yeah.
Right.
And I think Calgary might be selling at the deadline at this point.
Same here.
Yeah. It's not working. It's not.
The thing that sucks about the Calgary Flames too is that they have a lot of good players, but the problem is that they're not going to be able to use them in the right way that they can succeed. I feel like a guy that I really think like that is an Andrew Mangiapane. Like, I think that if you trade him at the deadline, I think you get him to a team that really has a good top 6 where you can really find a good center and a good slot in there. Even though he's already playing with Gaudreau and Monahan, I think that he's a really valuable, underrated piece. I really do.
Do you attribute this to, I mean, I was going to say, do you attribute this shortcoming for Calgary? Do you attribute that mostly to the player personnel management? Do you attribute that to the coaching?
It's a little bit of everything for me. Someone obviously lives on the West Coast. I see a ton of Calgary and Edmonton because I play the Canucks a lot in that Pacific Division, right? And over the years, I've just seen Calgary have so many iterations of this team, but always keep these same core players, but nothing ever gets done. And the coaching has been changed so many times that I can't even remember, I feel like. The surrounding cast has been changed more times than I can remember. But the core guys don't leave. Except this year, you finally had a core guy to part in Mark Giordano. And that's been one of the only saving graces of their entire team, in my opinion, in the last few years, about how good his leadership's been in the room, how good his on-ice performance has been at his age, and the fact that he was still able to win a Norris Trophy, 3 years ago now, I believe it was, or whatever it was?
Yeah.
So you lose your heart and soul of your team, and you still keep mediocre forwards that can't produce in the playoffs in Monahan and Gaudreau and call that your core talent, your all-star talent. I don't see how this is a team that, like, when Matthew Tkachuk is clearly the number one option on this team, but still isn't considered it when Gaudreau and Monahan are, like, the big names, their marquees, your core guys. I just think that they're not doing the right thing there. If it was up to me, Monahan and Gaudreau would have been traded 2 years ago. They would have been either into a semi-rebuild or just trying to, retool that offense a little bit. Like, I'm sorry, but like a Trevor Lewis coming in to play with Milan Lucic and Brad Richardson, that's not a fourth line that's going to bring you success. Even your third line with Backlund, Ritchie, and Dubé. Like, there's good players there that have potential, but is that really the best suited place for all those guys to play at? And with those, like, I just don't see it. I just don't see this team. And Blake Coleman being your first line right winger, I don't see how that is the right option. It's not, especially the contracts. I just don't see Calgary's. I think really agree with whoever. I think it was Carter that said the nosedive, or whoever said the nosedive.
No,
like,
that was
it was Nick. Yeah. Okay, I thought it might have been.
I've almost wanted to even say they could finish as low as 7th.
They really could.
Unless like Markstrom, if Markstrom's got to play like he did in Vancouver that last year.
And that's the other thing I was going to say too, is that I love Jakob Markstrom. I think he's great, and I love seeing him get paid. I was sad when he left the Canucks, but I want to see him get his payday. Like, I'm sorry, but he didn't warrant any of that, any praise last season. He was very mediocre, and if he can't have a good season this year, Calgary, like you said, easily could be near the bottom, and they could be selling heavily going into the deadline, which I think is a smart move for them anyway, because they should have sold 2 years ago.
Yeah, Calgary doesn't have anybody on the way either. Like, we talk about certain teams where they have this one, like, solid like even William Eklund, who we didn't think was going to make the team for the Sharks. You said, Ducks as well. You said he's pressing that spot. We have guys like Cole Perfetti that are coming up for the Jets. There are teams that, at least when you see the slow decline, you can see the pieces that are getting ready to reinvent that team and push them back upwards. I don't see that on this Calgary team.
Same here.
I see a Calgary team that is slowly decaying and is going to continue to slowly decay until they admit the fact that they are not getting that second wildcard spot.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And honestly, ironically, you could throw the same thing towards the Edmonton Oilers, but instead of them keeping the same guys for too long, they haven't brought anyone in to support their core cast, because, in my opinion, Zach Hyman is not going to make this team some top-tier Pacific Division beast and make Connor...
Oh, not Duncan Keith?
Oh, my God, don't even get me started on that one. Giving up assets for a man that shouldn't be even in the NHL. Great move, Ken Holland.
Was stupid.
To be fair, after seeing that contract...
Years old.
Right. To be fair, like, Chicago blew that as well the second I saw the contract they gave to Seth Jones. Like, it's one of those trades. It's one of those trades that, like, that whole like trade tree is just a bunch of L's across the board that I cannot understand. Like, I think only, like, Columbus comes out of those trades, and I'm just like, okay, you guys did all right.
That's why I was so terrified when we had to re-sign Pionk.
Oh my God.
Oh, no.
Was his deal?
His deal is actually very reasonable, Neil Pionk.
It's actually very reasonable.
I'll pull it up for you right now.
We know
he was going to get like 8.5.
Neil Pionk is currently making 5.95 till 2024-2025.
Okay,
yeah.
That's pretty reasonable for that market, absolutely.
Yeah, especially considering what, like, look at Zach Werenski, right? Like, I would say Zach Werenski and Neil Pionk had pretty, on par seasons, and Zach Werenski got paid, what, like $9 million, $9.5 million, whatever that contract was. So
Nurse got 9.2.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah.
Nurse had a good year, but the fact that Edmonton was so willing to negotiate on his best year was just staggering to me. Like, wait a year, his value will go down.
Yep.
Like, at least to, like, an $8 million, which is something better than what you made him in this year. You literally gave him his payday when it wasn't needed to happen. It didn't need to happen.
So you compare that to what Larson got in Seattle, actually. Yes. I mean, I know they're not quite the same defenseman, but, like, Larson, I think he's only at, like, what, 4 or 4.5 for, like, 4 years. He's older, though. Yeah.
He had a good year, though. He's understanding his role.
I would make the argument that an Alex Larson can be more important to your team than than a Darnell Nurse can be. And I think that Larson is a very underrated defenseman in the NHL, even though that trade, never be worth Taylor Hall. But I think he's very underrated. And I think that the deal that Seattle gave him, the role he's going to be playing in this year, I think it's a really good, where is the deal right now? Yeah, Adam Larson's making $4 million for the next 4 years. That's a very, very underrated contract, in my opinion. Because he's without a doubt a number one pairing defenseman, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Sorry, you cut out there. He's making how much?
4x4.
4x4? Oh, that's not bad. Man.
Not bad at all.
And he's on a team with defensemen that can be more offensive when he doesn't need to be.
So talking
like
about...
Vince Dunn is very creative in that regard.
For sure, yeah. So on that mark with the Oilers, I want to get this going and get this conversation wrapped up because don't want to go for 1,000 years. But either way, talking about that defense. Right now, the current according to Daily Faceoff, the defensive pairings for the Oilers are Darnell Nurse with Tyson Barrie, Keith with Cody Ceci, and then Slater Cuckoo playing with Evan Bouchard. How do you feel about that, Nick? Do you think that that's a team that a defensive core that can carry you to a wild card position or somehow a top 3 spot in that division, like we were saying maybe they could be, or do you think that that's a worse version of the defense we saw last year?
Well, if you're going to go up against Vancouver's forward group or you're going to go up against Vegas's forward group, I'd say probably not. And you also have to consider the goaltending too. I'm not going to hate on Smith. He had a really good year last year. But the thing is, he is another year older. Can he replicate that performance over an 82 game season, especially when the backup goaltending hasn't been all that great either?
Yeah.
So that's why I was thinking Edmonton would maybe even slide into third this year. And they would also, I know this is getting away from the defense, but they need a couple bounce back performances from a guy like Kyler Yamamoto. And there were some others as well a couple others who had kind of tailed off quite significantly versus the previous season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I still can't believe how the Edmonton Oilers absolutely bungled that. Like, lest we forget, I totally agree 1,000% about that Mike Smith sentiment and the goaltending situation there. Let us not forget that the Edmonton Oilers could have drafted the Wall this year, and they traded down with Minnesota, who immediately drafted him. Or no, drafted Lambos, I think, as well. They drafted Lambos and them as well. Whoever it was, they traded down, and he was immediately drafted. Where I just stood there and I was like, so do you think Mike Smith is playing to 50? Because you have no I watched that preseason game. Konovalov is too frantic in the net. He's not ready. Koskinen is a real shot in the dark. Sometimes you get like the second coming of Keith Kincaid when he was playing in Devils years, and sometimes you get like 4 goals on 4 shots. You don't know. It's the scariest Russian roulette with 7 bullets. Like, I don't understand what this Oilers team think. They're going to run Smith to the ground. This isn't a 56-game season. This is 82.
Not to mention a 56-game season where you're playing Ottawa 10 times and the Canucks with COVID written 10 times.
Right.
This is a very different year, and I don't see Mike Smith. I think Mike Smith, I'm not going to write him off. Like you said, you guys all said, fantastic year last year, and credit to where he's doing. To perform at that age, that well, like, I got to give him all. And he even played very well, I would say, in the playoffs. Even though they got swept, like Mike Smith was one of the big reasons why they were able to go into overtime and go into like triple overtime in Game 4 and all of that. He was a huge reason for that. So,
well, yeah, he gave up 2 goals in Game 1 too, which wasn't overtime. It was 2 empties. Yeah.
What was that, Carter?
One thing though, I wonder how this new travel schedule is going to affect the players. I am curious about that with them having to go fully coast to coast now. I mean, they obviously did have to do a bit of that in the Canadian division, but I'm wondering specifically for the American teams in the Pacific, how that's going to affect the players, being a full year off that, I just wonder if it'll have any effect on the game,
Yeah, for sure. It probably will. I would say only for like the first 20 games though, or maybe less than that. It won't be a thing where we see a lot of longevity with these guys struggling.
Some teams, like even Seattle, right? Their first road trip, they have to go to the Eastern time zone for, I think, 3 games and 1 in the Central. They're going to have probably the most miles logged this year, or if not San Jose. Usually those teams obviously on the coast are going to be right up there.
It's always Vancouver and those teams that have to travel the most like that in the Pacific.
Oh.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Nick, for coming on and talking. So before we end, let's just go through your predictions from top to bottom on the Pacific. Now that we've got it all aired out, what are your predictions for this season?
I'm going to try to be consistent with what I wanted to release for my season predictions video. I wanted to I want to go off on a limb with a little bit of this. So, I mean, haters come at me, but all right, we'll start at the bottom. This is going to be a bit of a trick that I'm playing on my favorite team. So, I'm going to say the Sharks finish at the bottom. Right? I'm not saying that they couldn't do better, but hoping that if I predict them to finish at the bottom, that they'll actually have a better season. So I'll say San Jose there. I'll put Anaheim 7th. I'll say Calgary in 6th. 5th, I'm going to say Vancouver, although I won't be surprised if they finish 3rd. 4th, I'm going to say Los Angeles, but I'm only sending 3 teams from the Pacific to the playoffs. So those teams will be Edmonton in 3rd. I'll take the Kraken for that goaltending in 2nd, and then obviously Vegas in 1st.
Awesome. I think that's a very, very solid prediction on how we'll look in the Pacific. And you'll probably be right, because the Pacific never surprises.
The only thing I'd change is I'd maybe change LA and Vancouver, and that's it. That's the only thing I'd maybe change.
That's like tomato, you know? Like, you really don't know what it's going to be like at that point with how
and neither would make the playoffs, so it wouldn't matter.
Exactly.
Well, true.
Thank you so much, Nick, for joining us. Guys, make sure to go subscribe to TwistedWristerHockey on YouTube, and make sure to check out all of his socials. They'll all be linked down in the description below. Anything you want to say to the viewers before we end the episode?
Hey, you Jets fans have a special season ahead of you. I think that we're gonna witness a deep run from that team.
I really hope so. I really, really do.
That'd be very nice.
Please take care of Brendan Dillon. We love him dearly. Yeah.
We
already love him.
I absolutely love this guy.
All right, Nick, thank you so much for joining the episode and coming on. We'll definitely have to have you back sometime during the regular season to talk more about this specific division and how it's shaping up. Guys, make sure to go check out Zach and Carter's channel, the Nolan Hockey Podcast, as usual. This episode will be live on my channel tonight, as you're already watching it. It's also on the Spotify. Go check out the Spotify down in the description. Thank you so much for watching this episode. As always, check out all the links down in the description below. Have a great rest of your day. Peace, love, and positivity. This is going to be a good season of hockey. I can't wait.